Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today. I hope all of you are doing absolutely fantastic. I apologize if I don't sound too fantastic. I've been sick over this weekend and doing a lot of game reviews. I just dropped one over on Retro Rebound for Bomb Rush Cyberpunk if you want to check that out. Today we're talking about Immortals of Aveum. We have another review dropping later this week, and of course I'm going to be dropping my impressions of Starfield on August 31st, so stay tuned if you're looking for some information on a lot of brand new games. With that, as I said, we're talking about Immortals of Aveum, where EA Originals has quietly overhauled itself, and I've been really looking forward to this one, strictly because EA is winning me back. When you look at what's going on with the Star Wars Jedi series and the relationship that's growing with Respawn, and then you see EA's reinvestment in single-player games, where we don't know how it'll turn out, but BioWare being allowed to make a primarily single-player game again is a step in the right direction. Where EA originally thought that the single-player games are on the way out, they're starting to show that they're actually one of the biggest providers of them nowadays. So it's amazing to see this 180. And the EA Originals program was never a snooze fest, but it was typically a home to more passion project indie style games, A Way Out or that game with Yarny and so on and so forth. But it's quietly overhauled itself, where now it's focusing on bigger budget projects like a partnership with Koei Tecmo for Wild Hearts, or you get something really interesting in Immortals of Aveum. So I was curious to see what the next step was in the EA Originals program, where they continue to bleed that system more into AAA game design. Overall, I found myself enjoying most of it. I have a couple of snags with the game's story and acting, and overall suffering from what I like to call AAA-itis. Now, full transparency before I begin the review in earnest, if you did not know, I just want to bring it to your attention. While I didn't work directly with EA for this, I did do 2 sponsored posts here on my community page for Immortals of Aveum, just pointing people towards the newest trailer. That was literally it. So in case you do feel like the review's been contaminated, I just want to make sure I'm open and honest about all that stuff. I feel like I still reviewed it fairly, but of course it's up to you to decide if you want to continue watching or not. I just want to bring it to your attention. So with that, if you're new here and you're interested in day one reviews, you're in the right place. We got a lot coming up. Consider subscribing. So let's begin with the story, where there's a lot of good stuff packed in here, but it kind of gets muddied a bit. So when it comes to Immortal of Aveum's story, you play as a character named Jack, who comes from a place called Seren. It's there his family and his closest friends live, and long story short, a war consumes his home, and so it sends him on a bit of a quest for vengeance, if you will, which then splashes him in the thick of the Immortals, and learning about the secrets of the magic that both saves and pollutes this world. Now, on the world building front here, and the amount of lore that was packed in from Ascendant and EA, I'm actually quite impressed. There is a lot of attention to detail in how things are done here, whether it's the amount of orders that have existed in this game's world, to the very secrets behind the magic you use. There's some cool twists and turns if you end up really liking the world like I did. However, what drags it down actually isn't the story itself, where characters have sound motivations and things move at a pretty decent clip, and I think stay relatively interesting because of that well thought out world. It's unfortunately the characters and the acting, where they're either not memorable or I'd say poorly written when it comes to dialogue. Whether it be Forspoken or Atlas Fallen or Atomic Heart, or yes, add Immortals of Aveum to the list, we are just submerged deeply in this era of main characters that are really annoying, being the stars of the show and tearing down an otherwise interesting story with good potential here. Now, it's up to you whether you can ignore it enough or not. For me, it's the fact that this character is trying to just be cool and sarcastic all the time, despite the otherwise grand circumstances around them. And I don't know why we're trying to write main characters this way, because the stakes feel high in this story. Like, there is one particular moment around the 5th or 6th chapter that made me pick my head up and go, oh, that's really interesting. But anytime this dude or other characters start talking, I just groan. I'm just like, oh, here we go. Here we go. Why, man? And I had a couple of other why, man moments in the gameplay I'll get into. But yeah, the story has a lot of potential. You may be more forgiving of it than I, but I personally couldn't stand some of the characters. But the world itself is so cool that it kept me interested and carried me all the way through the 15-chapter story. Now, continuing on into that gameplay, this is where things get really cool, I feel, because One thing that this game does really well is has a proper visual language communicated to the player in a way that they can respond easily while feeling pretty badass. It's simplistic yet effective. So basically the main colors that are guiding this game are red, green, and blue. And you'll have various spells that match these colors, whether it be your blue spell that functions more like a semi-auto rifle, or your red spell that's more of a shotgun blast, or the green spell that's more of a burst fire weapon. These spells are gradually going to evolve and upgrade and become multi-tools, and your fingers are going to be all over the controller, down to the D-pad, left trigger, bumpers, putting up a shield, switching weapons with Y. I mean, you are going to be all over this controller, and it did make me appreciate how well done the controls for this game were. Now, because there are so many controls, there were times I had to, for example, take my thumb off the movement stick and go down to the D-pad to switch to maybe an ability that let me slow enemies down or stun them. It's those times where Immortals of Aveum does stumble a bit because of how much they've packed into the combat system. And I think that's because of a degree of AAA-itis creeping into the game where they got maybe more budget than they anticipated. And while it's a jam-packed game that has well-paced mechanics that continue to unlock through and through, it unfortunately sometimes packs them so tight that you have these combat encounters that are a bit overwhelming and unbalanced in my opinion. But when it's clicking, it feels great. It's times where you can read an enemy's health bar and see, okay, I take out the blue spell, fire away, and then maybe I take out the red spell and melt some armor away, and then you slow an enemy down that's aggroing you. The problem is, though, is the game starts you off in a really weak spot where you don't have multiple dashes, things that feel like necessities to create what I think is an artificial challenge. And what unfortunately ends up happening is the early combat sections, you feel a little too glued to the ground. Like you unlock a hover before a second air dash, honestly. And I thought that was a little bit frustrating because the dodging is needed, because I'm totally fine with aggressive enemies. I think overall it works once you get all those tools, but initially it doesn't feel very good because it feels like I have one arm tied behind my back because the game just wanted to be challenging without actually creating one, but rather making an artificial challenge. So the combat is really enjoyable and fast-paced when everything's clicking together. Visually, it's communicated quite well, and I think that's also impressive given the fact that you look at just how colorful this world is and then how colorful the enemies are and how you have to really use color to respond to things properly. And I think the game has a fantastic visual palette. But one thing that just made me groan when I was playing in my chair just across this room was I found a bracer and I'm like, oh, what's this? And I pressed the start button and there's a gear menu. This game is already jam-packed tight, in my opinion, with a talent tree that we'll get into, but also the magic system. Like there's already a ton going on there. And this is where the AAA-itis kicks up. This game just didn't need a gear system when it had such great mechanics that could have been fine-tuned more and balanced better. It didn't need a gear system that, while at times can be cool because it'll augment like how certain spells function based off the gauntlets you're wearing, or you'll get little passive upgrades like rings you'll wear that'll do certain different spells, and you can actually see those rings on your hand, which I thought was a little cool touch there. It's a gear system that feels arbitrary. The upgrade system is attached to it, so as you beat these enemies with the red, green, blue, they're going to drop essence. That essence, alongside gold you get, is going to fuel this upgrade system. You can also deconstruct pieces of loot that you get that you don't want anymore. And the reason this is all important is as you're going through the early parts of the game, you're going to go, why can't I go here? Why can't I go there? And then eventually you unlock portals, which you can then use to travel across the entire game's world. Now, what's great about Immortals of Aveum, it's a relatively, I'd say, linear type game, which harkens back to more of the 360 PS3 era, where you have these crazy gameplay mechanics, crazy ideas, and again, a lot more of a slimmed down scope. And so you can go through this game in like 10-ish hours if you like, or you can stop, smell the roses, and just go off and do a bunch of exploring. There's not like a ton of side quests or something like that. It's really about unlocking these new abilities that let you explore layers of the world. It feels like there was a touch of influence from the Star Wars Jedi series put into Immortals of Aveum, perhaps some DNA growing within the EA company as a whole. We'll see if other games are influenced by it, but it did remind me of that quite a bit, just not on as broad of a scope. Now, doubling back can kind of suck because you'll fight the same enemies in the same spawns, and there are certain parts in the story that as you're running to your next objective, if it's through an area you've been, you'll be fighting those same enemies again. So multiple times, same spawns can get a little bit tedious because the encounters don't feel fresh, and it feels like the game's kind of stagnating your progress for the sake of padding your hour clock, which it already is pretty slim in the scheme of things with a 15-chapter story, with some of those chapters being a host of cutscenes, and that's really it. There's also the talent tree that you're going to find. It's simple: red, green, blue magic. You're going to level up as you complete all these tasks and quests, and you're going to invest these points into this skill tree, whether it be the green, which focuses more on regen as well as air dashes, or the red, which focuses on armoring your character and more damage, and so on and so forth. Everything in this game is upgradable. I don't think it's a bad thing per se, but it's where, with so much unique identity, like I always as a kid dreamed of cool games where there would be a bow user that would shoot a magic spell out of it. I found it a little disheartening that we were stepping away from what I felt more of that type of stuff, like more cool weapons that you could use, and instead just leaning into cheap gear, recycled assets, and a talent tree. It felt like they were going all for identity, and then this AAA-itis kind of consumed the game in certain aspects. So overall, Immortals of Aveum is a good time. Don't get it twisted. I know I had some critiques here. It is not a waste of your time. Like, it is overall a fun game with a very interesting world and a story that I don't think will grab a lot of you. But again, I think that's where the world building and focus on that does some of the heavy lifting. It does have a pretty annoying main character, and I guess main cast in general, really. And I think that Immortals of Aveum is a game that you wait for a bit of a sale. I'd be comfortable saying if you looked at me and went, when should I get this, Matty? 45 bucks? Sure. This is a game that you can also wait till Black Friday and pick up for probably half off, and absolutely you shouldn't blink at that. Immortals of Aveum is refreshing, especially in the gauntlet of reviews and everything I'm playing. It's very different. It does stand out, and I love what EA is doing with this program, but I can't just support them based off the principle of the program and say, well, this game gets a pass for me. There are flaws and enough drawbacks where right at launch, I don't think you should sprint out the gate for this one, but if you get it at a little bit of a cheaper discount, you might not be too upset. $40 being the really safe area around the launch period where I see just a lot of games dropping to at this point. If you can get it for $40, I don't think you'll be displeased at all. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is my review of Immortals of Aveum, which I played on the Xbox Series X. I'm looking forward to seeing your thoughts down below on this game, so let me know. Fire away. Other than that, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. Those links are in the description down below, and a big thank you to all the patrons, all the members who continue to support the heck out of the content here. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.